You are listening to the Bread Truck Monday podcast, a production of High Lakes Christian Church. Feel free to download all the episodes on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or stream us on Spotify. Thanks, and God bless. Well, good morning. Welcome to the Bread Truck Monday podcast. We are live today, not only on microphone, but also on video. So you can check that out. See these guys glistening?
Yeah.
Shiny
little
faces.
Extra beard oil this morning.
Yeah, little extra beard oil. Ben's beard is gone. He is in full Hawaii mode, and so he is just
Be
only
glad
with
he's
the
not wearing the hula suit.
Slathered with tanning oil now.
Oh,
disgusting.
When I was in college, we used to go down by the pool because I went to college in California, and we would do like the actual like tanning oil, like it's SPF 2.
Yeah,
just
burn your chonies clean off.
Yeah, well, it's a terrible idea.
Yeah, just basically skin cancer in a bottle.
Pretty much, yeah. You just like would layer that stuff as thick as you could. So then when you got done, you're like, oh man,
What's the point of putting that on, honestly?
Glistening boys.
I don't know.
SPF 2, that does nothing.
Essentially, you're basically just like putting like butter on your body.
Just multiply the burn factor.
But you would get pretty tan. But I could almost guarantee that it was definitely cancerous when it came down the way. So, but yeah, we would do that all. Like I would go down there, get my my studies done right down by the pool, and get a chance to get nice and
ulterior motives there, huh?
All brown.
Up.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, it's kind of the pool there at Hope is like in between like all the dorms, so it's like
dang.
Sometimes it just be like me.
Can you jump out of the dorm into the pool?
Well, yes, you can.
Really?
People got in trouble.
Not legally.
Yeah, not allowed. We had this thing. It was called the Lambda Lounge. That's what it was called.
Lounge.
Yeah, Lambda Lounge. And it was like a peak off the edge of the pool, and a guy jumped off that and went into the pool. I mean, it's a pretty good jump. And so his punishment for that was he had to go and serve in like a paraplegic,
I love Christian school punishments. It's just the most creative.
They're like
sick.
This is what you could have been.
Like.
But then, yeah, I think he still did it again after that. So.
Paraplegic.
They did a paraplegic.
Oh my gosh!
Place
bear you up on the hands of angels.
My roommates actually one time they stole the Christmas trees from the cafeteria. And they put it on the top of the Lambda Lounge.
Oh, that's
so
awesome.
When you walked out, there's just the
beautiful.
And everybody's like, "Who did this? This is such a disgrace to the school." But that is what I mean. Bible college. You're
Who
supposed
doesn't
to
want a Christmas tree on the peak of their roof?
Yeah, it looked
That's
great.
cool.
Yeah,
they didn't get any power up there, so it didn't like light up and everything. So. And then another time they threw a pumpkin off the top of that thing too as well. Just like those big giant pumpkins. They put it in the cafeteria and they had like it was like a 200-pound pumpkin. I mean it was massive, like a massive pumpkin. They stole that 200-pound pumpkin and they threw it up there and they threw it off.
We used to slingshot meatballs out of our dorm windows at people in the bar next door. It was pretty awesome.
Could you see them like fly?
Oh yeah, the bar was literally across the street, and we were Christian kids who were like,
they
they shouldn't be drinking anyways.
Sipping a drink and then like get hit in the side of the face with a giant meatball.
Yeah, they were the Swedish ones too. Them suckers were cantankerous.
Would they look back at you guys?
Oh yeah, they were so mad. They knew exactly what window it came out of. That's why I did it in my buddy's
You're
window.
Just enjoying a beer and you get smacked with a Swedish meatball right in the side of the head. That would be really shocking, honestly. Yeah. But, well, any stories from you, Ben? Boise, they guys do anything fun at all? I mean, like it is Boise Bible College. It probably was
dude. Aaron's like
boring,
throwing me under the bus the last 2 weeks, man.
No,
that's it. I'm getting you back.
Well, that's fine. But anything fun that ever happened at Boise?
I was married when I got there, so like all the people treated me like I had the plague, you know.
Yeah,
it's like, you're one of those old married people. So I was a non-traditional student.
They missed out.
Yeah, so basically, like you're the one that doesn't want to have any fun. You know, you're just kind of hanging out and.
So we talked about your engagement last week, and it was just...
Don't bring that up.
There was tons of love from everyone in the congregation about that.
No, there wasn't.
During the week.
Loads and loads of love.
It was just... The knight fell off his horse and hit the ground so hard he shattered into a million pieces. Thanks to
I wish
Aaron.
we were recording video last week. Ben's face was so red when he was telling that story. He's like, "How did I get myself into this?"
It was glorious. No, people loved it. People loved that story. But so then after you became the knight in shining armor, you got engaged on top of a dog crate and you used your guitar. Then your first living quarters with your amazing wife was a trailer on the property of Boise Bible College.
That is not true. That is 100% false.
What was it? Did you guys have a house the first time?
Yeah, we lived in a house.
Okay, you lived in a house the first time. Okay.
Yeah.
Star.
No, not in Star. No, we lived in a house here. We were married for
that's right.
6 months or something like that before we moved. So she got a taste of the good life living in a house, and then we just became trailer trash.
Now, was the trailer was in the parking lot of the school?
No,
or?
it's behind the school, kind of.
Okay.
It's on the property. They have like 20 acres or something like that. 15, I don't know, something like that. And yeah, so it was behind. They have like a little, I don't know, 5 or 6 RV parking spaces.
That's awesome.
Behind the school because they didn't have any married housing.
Did you have to like pay rent for that spot?
Yeah.
Really?
It was dirt cheap, but yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy cheap. Yeah. So.
And then how long you stayed that the entire time that you were on campus?
Three out of my 4 years there. We
really?
We lived in an RV. Yeah. And then we got pregnant with Gracie. I didn't get pregnant with her.
Well,
my wife did.
Yes.
But and so we actually had gotten hired full time at the church I was interning at my senior year, the summer before my senior year. And so we were like, well, hey, if we're making a full time wage and that kind of thing, then let's buy a house, an actual house. So we did.
That's awesome.
So at that point we were pretty sure we were gonna stay in the area for a while.
So then no pranks could really happen from you at the Bible college because you were the plague and you were
I have to
inside
think
of a
through
trailer.
like how if we did anything really stupid. I mean, my whole life I've done really stupid things, but I may have taken a pause for a year or something.
I had a little Toyota like pickup, and my friends are just idiots. And they decided one evening they were going to get as much bread dough as they physically could. So they got this massive bread dough. They like
where did you buy bread dough?
I don't know. I still don't know where they even got this. They got this massive amount of bread dough, and they mixed it up in like a barrel, like a trash can barrel, and they dumped it into the back of my truck. So it filled up the back of my truck with bread dough. So then it got hot the next day.
They had yeast in it.
Yeah, and it rose. Like I had actual like a loaf of bread in the bed of my truck.
How did you get rid of that?
Well, so it was kind of funny. So like this was like the day before we were gonna move out, from our dorms. It was like at the end of the year. So I didn't know it had happened. So I go out to get my truck to like load stuff up, and there's just a loaf of bread just like in the back of my truck.
That is awesome.
I was just like, I was dumbfounded by it. So I drove over because I was like mad, right? I was like really upset. So I drove over to like the dorms because there was like a cul-de-sac right there. And I just by happenstance, my buddy who I knew would probably be a part of this was right there with his car, but he had gone inside. So his trunk was open. So I just got a shovel and I shoveled that bread right into the trunk of his car and I shut it. Well, the funniest part about that is it wasn't his car; it was his brother's car.
Yes.
So his brother picked the car up and left. So like days later, it started smelling like yeast, like inside of his car. He's like, "What is this?" And sure enough, he opens the back. It's like moldy, like bread is in the back of his car. That was just all of that was lucky, like how that went
You
down.
took a shovel.
Yeah, I did like literally like
Flat
a
nose.
flat nose shovel, and I was just shoveling that in as quickly as I could into the bed of his, or like it was like a Ford Tempo, like right into
that poor vehicle.
Yeah.
Never the same.
Oh, it's never the
No,
same.
there's no help for a Ford
I think
Tempo anyway.
I think he had to burn it. I think that he had to like put that thing and burn
Stand
it.
right in that girl and
Yeah,
take her
it was
to pit.
basically, and he drove it from Oregon or from California up to Oregon like that. Just the smell of like old yeasty bread. coming through.
Yum, dude.
Love it. Well,
Nothing better.
I think one thing is clear. Aaron's theological education was extremely compromised, and clearly they didn't work him nearly hard enough. If they have that much creativity
That's
to
true.
think of stupid things they can do to each other,
Oh, man.
clearly they needed more homework.
Ben was in the library the whole time.
Yeah,
so
I was,
Yeah,
man. I was 100%.
Ben was
I was
24
in
hours a
focus
day
mode. I'm like,
inside the
I
library.
don't want to be here any longer than I have to.
Oh man, we had so many times that we did stupid stuff. Like my one friend worked at Disneyland, and so he had to wake up at 4 a.m. like every single day because he was actually Buzz Lightyear. He was the character Buzz Lightyear. So I walked past his room and his room door was open just a little bit. And I was like, oh, this is a perfect opportunity. And the school had just gotten this delivery of chairs, like not like folding chairs, but like chairs you can stack, So we took those chairs and we filled his room with chairs, like probably 150 chairs inside of his while he's just dead asleep.
Oh, while he's in there.
Yeah.
Dude, how hard do you have to sleep not to notice that 5 guys are unloading 150 chairs in your room?
We were like as quiet as possible, like because there were showers in the room, so we like popped and we put it in the shower. We stacked them up in the shower. So he woke up 4 a.m. and just like chairs falling everywhere. Oh man.
Dude.
He thought the whole time that I had like illegally broke into his room. Like, no, your door was open. Like, for sure your door was open, and we walked. It was just a perfect moment. So,
Oh, it's a good thing we didn't go to the same school together. That would have been disastrous.
it'd been disastrous. Well, you were water ballooning kids off the top of the.
Shooting meatballs at people.
You were always from a distance. That was your.
That's my trick. I'm the defensive
He's
master.
got to get a head start
Yeah.
when they get mad and start chasing him.
Well, you hit a football player, didn't you?
I did, yeah. U of O lineman and the rest of his crew. Yeah, and they
That
saw
was-
some
that
top
was
of
not well
we
played.
We'd tape water balloons to the top of parking garages in Eugene, and we'd take slingshot launchers. And so there'd be one kid over here, one kid over there, and I'd just take that thing like 10 feet back. You could go about 200 yards with that thing. You'd
absolutely.
be pretty pinpoint with it.
I mean, it kind of gets like that English on it, but you can really
bend it. Yeah.
sling it.
Yeah.
But then they saw you. They saw you
Yeah.
that time, and then
Yeah.
you were done for.
Gone.
Because there's only one way down.
Yeah, I took the fire pipe water line down, and my buddy tried to, and he fell, and he was in a cop car for a while.
You went down the side of the building?
Yeah,
No way.
yeah.
Dude.
That's the only way down at that point, because they were coming up the dang staircase.
And they're much bigger than you.
They're substantially larger.
So
yeah.
so let me get this straight. You and your buddy were sliding
Multiple.
down a drain pipe
Yeah.
down the side of the building.
Yeah.
He fell and got hurt,
No, and he didn't get hurt, but he.
and you ran off and left him.
Yes, precisely. Into the U of O cemetery, and I watched from a distance. And he's like 6'8". He could hardly fit inside that cop car, and he was in there for like 2 hours. He was like permanently auger-slaughtered his knees from that.
There's one thing I've learned about Isaac over the time that I've like worked with him is he will leave you in the dust. That is a fact. Like if there is a moment where he potentially
His loyalty is very thin.
I've heard the story
I
from
get
Trav.
out of there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
run.
Yeah.
But hey, this weekend your wife, she had success.
She had success killing an elk.
with an elk, and you weren't there.
No, I wasn't there again. Yeah. She was
I
all
gotta hear
around.
this story. I was telling Heather, and I was busting up laughing. I'm like, Isaac, man, how does he get away with this kind of stuff? So, tell me how this elk kill
We
went
were
down.
day 4 on the season. There's only 5 days, and the previous day, we realized that the elk were on the Sun River side of the river, and they were hanging out over there, and they weren't leaving the river, or they weren't leaving the private. So I was like, I don't think they're going to leave. I think they're smarter than that. There's actually a public section across the river from where they were at, but I was like, I don't think they're going to head over there. So tomorrow morning, I'm actually going to go south down to like Mowich country, south of Chemult, west of Chemult. And so I did. I went down there and started hiking up this cool drainage, found a really cool spot full of elk sign, and I was getting into some elk, and then I get a phone call. And Millie had gone back to Sun River to see if the elk were still on the public. And she's like, Isaac, all caps, she texts me, call me, because I don't have good service down there. And she's like, I just shot one.
Which you
I
never
just
do.
shot one, which I never do. And so I tried calling her back, and I don't have service. So I start like running out of there to get back to I was like 2 miles up this trail probably from my dirt bike, and my dirt bike was like 3 miles from my truck. And so I start running down, and then she calls me again. She's like, I think I shot a cow. And I'm like, this is not good. This is a bull only tag. So I'm like, oh my gosh. Because when I took her out target practicing, you know how I do things. We went out literally the night before season to get the rifle sighted in. So she's shooting the rifle for the first time the night before rifle season starts. And I'm like she's trying to find the target, and she's like, can't find the target through the scope. So I'm like,
How is her eye too close to it? Because I've done that where my eye is
well,
just
it's
too.
like you're supposed to keep one open so you can kind of pinpoint it with your right eye. But anyways, so she wasn't very great at that. She was great shooting. She had bullseyes every single time, and she had a hard time acquiring the target. And so I was like, oh man, she thought she was on the bull and was actually on a cow. But she did shoot a cow. She did shoot a bull. Not a cow.
She did shoot a bull.
So what happened though, she shot the bull, and the bull just like took like 20 steps and then went straight nilch backwards, and his horns went into this soft meadow dirt, all of them. It was like a 5x5 bowl, and went into
That's
the dirt,
awesome.
buried, and his snout was just facing up. And so she looked at it, and she's like, oh, this is with her other binoculars, she's like, I think I just killed a cow, because she couldn't see any antlers. So then,
so you're still south,
I'm still south. I'm running back to the
and
vehicle.
you have no service.
Hardly any. So
Okay.
I'm getting periodic texts. And she's like, there's a game warden here. Somebody called the police on me. And fortunately, it is a bull. So apparently the warden showed up and she walked up to this animal that she thought was a cow for the first time with the warden. So she's like,
no.
she called me in tears before this. And it's just a roller coaster ride for her. And she walks up and he's like, is this your bull? And she looks at and she's like, oh, there's a horn there. Yeah, that's my bull. And he's like, do you know you have to be 150 yards from the river? There's a 150 yard shooting buffer from the river. She's like, I had no idea. No, I didn't know that. And
What was she 150 yards from the river?
she was not. She shot it. Well, the herd was 150 yards when she shot it.
Okay, and then it ran.
So she shot the animal and it was 150 yards, but she was about 136 after they ranged it from the river.
Okay.
And it's so flat, you can't see where the river starts, like where the bank is, because the grass is too tall and stuff. So he was like, honestly, nobody could have been able to tell if you were 150 yards exactly or not. So this is your first bull. You're by yourself. Awesome job. Keep the bull. And the person across the river who called you in can deal with it. So he was good and cool, and we got to keep the bull. And her dad showed up before I did, and we quartered that pup out, got out of there. It was an overall roller coaster day for her, but she was very excited by the end of it.
Wow, what a roll of emotions
Yeah.
she went through there. Wow, that's
At
amazing.
first she thought it was a cow. Then she thought she was going to get the bull taken from her because she was within 150 yards. But that's the frustrating thing about that area is there's no like clear regulation as to how to go about shooting.
There will be now.
Yeah. There's actually going to be like a meeting, I guess, in La Pine with the Deschutes County commissioners, and a couple of neighbors came out and like they were taking pictures of us with our animal, like all mad and stuff like that. And
Really?
Because a couple other guys got bulls in that section too. And they're like, we're going to meet with the commissioners on Tuesday in La Pine. I'm like, well, I'll be there.
Just to figure out if that area is allowed.
It is allowed. It's public. And like, obviously there's a buffer, which nobody knew about. But aside from that, like everything's legal. It's public. So
Wow.
nothing says no hunting.
So you're going to go to this meeting tomorrow and
Yeah.
show them what's
Well,
who's
I'm
boss.
just I think they just think all hunters are just blatant idiots. And I mean, granted, I am a large idiot a lot of the time. However, I do want to go explain ourselves. Like this, like she was the first one there. She put a stock on these animals. She did it right. One shot and that thing keeled over. It wasn't redneckery. She was shooting to the north. There's nothing to the north. So she did it right. And they just need to calm down. If you're gonna, and I did some research, and this is a topic for another time, but every single home around that public area of hunting land is over $1.5 million on Zillow.
Wow.
So there's these rich people who move to the edge of the wilderness and expect there to be no wilderness next to them. They don't want anybody
And
accessing that wilderness.
No
It's only
wilderness
them.
activity.
Exactly.
Which is
no-
like, hey,
they
if
want
you're
everything
gonna-
domesticated.
If you're gonna live
Yeah.
here, you're gonna have to expect that other people who
Yeah.
live, or you're gonna vacation here or whatever,
Yeah.
expect that the residents are going to subsistence hunt
Actually need to provide food
Maybe
for their
even
families. Yeah. Like,
somewhat close to your home. You
yeah.
know.
So,
Yeah.
but it was an overall great day, and she's super excited, and this is her first big game animal. So it's
Wow.
good stuff.
Is this her first like kill ever? Like that's like a
She killed a chucker once.
well, okay, that's like a bird, but
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
like of a large game thing.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yep.
Congratulations, Millie. That's awesome. This Friday we had a big event. Event this Friday. We had our volunteer appreciation night here at the church. Really fun night, really funny, and I think the volunteers appreciated what we actually did there. But
Awesome. Great turnout. And there was, 115 people there probably, something like that?
Yeah. And so we did kind of as an award show. Ben was in a full tuxedo.
Woo!
Full
Spicy.
tuxedo. Man, he looked good with that
Yeah.
mustache and a tuxedo.
You might never see it again. So
So we gave out some
my
awards.
wife, it took her 25 years to see it again. So.
Yeah.
You did wear a tuxedo on your wedding, though.
Yeah, oh,
Yes.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
We didn't. There was no dog crate styled clothing. That was.
Dog crate.
Tweed.
What the heck is dog crate clothing?
I don't know. I don't know what that would look like, but you could probably come up with it. I could imagine.
I would figure something out.
But it was an awesome event. Got a chance to celebrate our volunteers and
was a lot of fun.
give them these little tiny awards and just stupid things like the warmest hug and excellence in what was it? Excellence in office
Yeah, administration.
help, administration
Yeah.
and help and. But just a great time, and there were several people that weren't there. One of the funniest ones was Kevin Bryan got the Do Everything Award, and then he didn't show up. So he does everything except for show up. Award is what he ended up getting. But it was a good time, and we appreciate you, like those of you that volunteer. And I mean, to think that there's 115 or some odd people that were there to that serve around the church is incredible. Like that's an amazing undertaking in order to put on service every single week. But not only service, but what happens during the midweek time as well with life groups and any other groups that take place here in the building too as well. Our people that do maintenance around the building, you know, we've shouted some of them out here on the podcast here before. But yeah, really, really good time.
Yeah.
Next week we have Bob Shaw preaching for us, which is
Yep.
going to be really, really neat. I saw that he went to the Oregon Duck game this week, and he got to meet Phil Knight, the guy
Really?
that started Nike. So Uncle
Wow.
Phil, yeah, there's a picture with him and
Jeez.
Uncle Phil, which is pretty cool. But so
Impressive.
he's preaching this
How
next
old's
week.
Phil now?
Oh man, he is old.
Is he?
Yeah, in
Gotta
his
be in
80s.
80s, 90s.
Yeah, that's why he's shelling out all this money to hopefully get Oregon a national championship for football, because he's like, I
wanna see it
I want to
before
see
I
it.
die.
Me too. I do too as well.
Yeah.
If I had money like that, I'd shell it out too as well. But yeah, he's shelling it out right now. So they won a big win this weekend too as well. But this week for the sermon, we dove into the story of Joshua and really a neat story about how we're called to be courageous and bold in the face of adversity, in the face of difficulty. And the main premise of this week's sermon was the idea that God keeps his promises, right? And for you, Ben, as you think about God keeping his promises, what does that mean to you? What does it mean to you just individually that God keeps his promises?
Well, I mean, obviously there's the eternal thing. You know, I can trust that he's that I have an inheritance that's waiting for me, a reward of sorts. But I think also, like, I guess on a personal level, you know, I look at you know, my household, you know, my wife, my kids, and how blessed, what a blessing that is, that he's just been faithful to me throughout the years. You know, we sing that song all my life, you've been faithful, and man, it almost brings tears every time, because it's like from you know, I don't have crazy wealth or anything like that, but I have a friend that always, you know, when he sees my family and everything and sees us interacting, and he's like, you're a rich man, you know? And it's like, yeah, my family's really, you know, a blessing, my kids, my wife. Also, you know, God's never left me in all the years that I've done ministry, and he's been faithful to bless that step of obedience. So that's the promise that I, you know, probably the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, that song always gets me too as well. Yeah. It's one of those things you know, when you die eventually, you know, you want sung at your funeral, right? The idea, like all of our life, God's been faithful through the highs and the lows of life, but also just the fact that we're blessed people. It's kind of like that he gets us ad, you know, where it's Jesus was rich, but it shows all these, like, you know, poverty scenes, kind of the idea that he was rich because he was blessed by the people that he was around, but also the fact that he was God, you know, in that kind of way. But yeah, for you, Isaac, what does this idea of, like, God's keeping his promises mean to you?
I think about what Ben said yesterday, that success is conditioned on our obedience. And I think that in my life, God has been so faithful to me, with, like kind of you were saying, Ben, with an amazing wife, an amazing home to live, and a great town. And these are all things that, like, I just feel like we don't even deserve. And yet God has been faithful to bless us. And I think God's promises stand even when we don't foresee or anticipate them or ask for them. They're just there. And it's just shocking to me that he's that good when I don't deserve any of them, and he just keeps pouring them out. Yeah,
that topic of success, I think, is a really big one, because our world likes to discuss success by, you know, wealth, success by notoriety, success by the things that we acquire, obviously, in life, and how much we can go up the ladder of success. And success in the kingdom is a different thing, Ben, and you talked a little bit about that. What does success in the kingdom look like when we see the entire scope of the Bible?
Yeah, I mean, when I talked about success yesterday and how it's connected to obedience, I broadened out, probably went beyond the text in terms of, you know, the text is specific about the success that God is talking about with Joshua is the success of the mission that he's called to. It's not necessarily the kinds of successes that we think of when we think of success or our culture thinks of. And so I think we have to specifically pinpoint that in this text, and I think in the New Testament as well, that obedience is key to success. The success is the success of the mission.
Yeah.
And so for Joshua, it was the conquest, but for us, it's a spiritual conquest of that the whole world might know. And so it's our quest is this community, this region of Lapine, and that kind of thing. And so I think our obedience to the Lord, and you see this over and over again, churches can get big and jettison the commands of God, but they don't succeed in the sense of true, authentic environment and true, authentic conversion of the community. And so I think that churches do have a tendency to kind of leave jettison the commands of Scripture to be more culturally relevant, quote unquote relevant. And I think that is to our detriment. So I do think that obedience is really important. And I did talk about like obedience when it comes to, in business or in, I talked about a number of different spheres of life, finances and things like that. And I think that I think we can broaden the principle out too, though. I mean, there's a lot written on the topic of, ethical business operations as a Christian business owner. And I know there are people far more qualified to talk about that than I am, but I do think that that is a requisite there as well,
Why do you think it's hard to, see the metrics of success when it's only the aspect of obedience? You know, get what I'm saying with that? That like obedience is very out there.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying,
kind of nebulous.
Kind of nebulous, yeah. And when you think about like ethics in business, there are a lot of people who are, very ethical in how they go about it, but then they don't end up being financially successful, right? Mm-hmm. And so why is that metric hard for us to see? Like when we say like, I just want to be obedient to God, and that will then hopefully, be the thing that is successful in the future, or a reward we gain in the future. Why is that metric hard to see?
I don't think that the success is always a tangible thing in terms of that. I don't think you're always going to see, profit margins reflect that necessarily, and I think David kind of addresses this in, I think it's Psalm 72. I don't quote me on that, but he talks about, I had almost stumbled and fell when I envied the prosperous nature of the wicked. And he basically, it's kind of a psalm that talks about how he looked around and he saw how evil, wicked people, or people that were dishonest, were profiting, and they were prospering. And he's like, I looked and I envied the prosperousness of the wicked. And then he said, but then I realized that it's kind of like God took him up to a 30,000 foot view, and he could see that like no matter how much you prosper in this life, if your eternity is wrecked, what difference does it make? Mm. And so, you can have a real successful and real prosperous 30 or 40 year career or whatever it is. But what about your eternity? What about the billions of years after that you will suffer rather than be underneath God's blessing? So, I don't think it's always a tangible thing in this life. And that's where the aspect of faith comes in. That I'm going to do things right, even if the bottom line doesn't reflect the success I hope it will. I do think God does bless us. I do think he does. And I think a lot of times it does reflect in our pocketbook or in our bottom line. But, and that's just good business practice. People want to do business with a company that has integrity, Yeah. And so I think that's important. But I don't think we can necessarily, say 100% all the time. It's not a formula. You do this and that will happen. Yeah. It's not a guarantee, I guess is what I'm saying.
And I think that's where some people struggle, is because they look around and, we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago in our life group, but the whole idea of coveting your neighbor's stuff, right? Mm-hmm. That we look, just like David did, we look at the wicked and we say, why are they getting financially blessed in this life? Or why are they receiving things that we want to receive or think that we deserve? And And for us today, like you're saying, that 30,000 foot view is where we have to put ourselves in. But the flesh is weak, and we see people that have much nicer cars than we have, or people that have much nicer houses, or have a boat, or whatever those things are that we desire to have as well. And we think that's what blessing really looks like. That's what success.
That's
really,
the good life.
That's the good life. Yeah, that's the success that we're not being able to attain. And I don't know. I just think that metric sometimes is hard to see because of the fact that 30,000 foot view is something that we a lot of times gets clouded, I guess, because of our own desires and our own wants. What about you guys? What do you think about that? That when it comes to this idea of success, the success in life in this world is viewed in one way, but yet in the kingdom it's viewed differently.
Yeah, it goes right along with what Ben was saying, that the kingdom is in view here. What does success look like for God's mission? And I love how in the book of Joshua and throughout the whole Old Testament, the promise isn't dependent on the carriers of the promise. God's going to make a way even if the carriers of the promise, those who the promise is made to, stumble and fall. He's still going to make his promise come to fruition. But the other thing, Ben, you said yesterday was that God gave two promises to Joshua. One was success, and the other was his presence. Mm-hmm. And I think in a lot of regards is if we're obedient to God, his presence is going to be with us, and that's what leads to success. So the presence comes first, or obedience comes first, and then you have the presence of God with you, and that's what leads to success. And I think that's the key point here, is that you cannot have success apart from having God with you. And that's one of the hopes of my life, is that, a lot of times I struggle to figure out, God, what's next, and what should I do here, and what's my next move, and the reality is, if I'm obedient to God, I'm doing the best I can to listen to him, then I'm in his will. I'm doing the best I can to hear him and to follow his directions. That's all I can do, and the rest I just have to assume that God has me right where he wants me, and I'm doing what he wants me to do. And so that promise of his presence with me is such a hope. It takes away a lot of anxiety in my life, because I'm just I'm doing what he wants me to do to the best of my ability, and I must be right where he wants me to be.
Yeah, because that desire to move up the ladder, whatever that looks like inside of your job or life, or inside of your home, whatever that is, that desire is going to a lot of times be not necessarily absent from God's presence, but when like you're saying, when we're sitting in his will and we're saying, I'm doing the best that I can, and I'm going to follow you and I'll be obedient to you, then God's going to be with us in that way, and the blessing will come. It may not come in a financial way in this right in this life, or it may not come right in the way that you want it to come, but the thing that is awesome about that is that God's presence will show up, and we will see it evident, and we'll be able to look back. That's, like what you're saying, Ben, when we look back at our life and we get teary when we hear that song, right, is that God has been faithful, and he has been with us, and we don't have to, I think there's a lot of anxiety and stress about, and myself included, but others as well, that I just need to climb the ladder. I need to figure out what the next step is. I need to figure out what my next 6 moves are for the next 5 years, and that's a lot of stress. It's a lot of worry and anxiety. But if we sit in God's presence, that's where we can trust that he is good and he's going to be in control.
Yeah. Yeah, it takes away all that stress. Because when it's in my ballpark and I have to do something to make it work the way that I want it to, we're not meant to handle that level of stress. We're just meant to be faithful where God has called us to, and he's going to lead us the rest of the way. And that's really all he does for Joshua and the Israelites. He tells them where to go next, and they listen and they obey, and they have success. When they disobey and try to do it their own way, that's when things go awry.
Yeah. So the story here of Joshua, where are we at in terms of the kind of the history of this entire big picture of the Bible, and why is this moment so important there, Ben?
Because it's the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. It's kind of what we covered Sunday. If you look at the picture on whole, it's finally, the day has finally arrived. And they thought this day was 40 years earlier under Moses' leadership, but ultimately the people rebelled against Moses, and they gave in to fear, and they didn't trust God for the promise that he had made to them, and so they ended up having to wander in the wilderness for another 40 years. So the day's finally come. So I think that's, we've kind of been waiting for this moment ever since Genesis chapter 12. So it's been a long time. There's been a lot of material between the promise made and the promise fulfilled, and it seems like a lot of material to us, but it probably seemed far more to them, because 400 years is a long time to, be enslaved and then finally finally come out and be given the land that, God promised to your ancestors. So,
and I liked how you said yesterday, and they lived happily ever after, right? Like this was the moment where everything is good. They're now inside of the promised land, and God is for us. Who can be against us? We're going to be courageous. But what happens?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll tell you, if you read the book of Joshua, and actually in the early part of the book of Judges, you'll see that the people were faithful through the lifetime of Joshua. But it was after that things fell apart. I'm going to save that for our next sermon in Judges. But sneak peek. Basically, they didn't pass it on to their kids.
Right.
They did not pass on a love for God to their kids. And so I'm not going to preach that sermon right now. But bottom line is, there's a whole generation that our trust in God is a generation away from extinction all the time. And it's incumbent upon parents to pass this on to their kids. Book of Deuteronomy chapter 6. So that's next week's sermon. So a little sneak peek, but so things go really sideways in Judges, and basically the bottom line is the people didn't finish the job. God had fulfilled his promise in getting them into the promised land and giving them victory during the lifetime of Joshua. And that was an ongoing project to drive the nations out. In fact, they were not to take over too many cities at once because there weren't enough Israelites to inhabit all of them, bottom line. And so the concern was, if you drive out all the inhabitants at once, then you've got all this land that's now uncultivated, and you've got a predator problem as well with regard to the lions and other animals. And they were concerned, God was concerned that the place would return to a Wild West frontier. And so there's a delay in some of the driving out of some of the inhabitants. And the bottom line is the future generations didn't finish the job.
Yeah.
They did not, they were not taught well what to do, and they did exactly as they were not supposed to do.
So let's dive into that really fast. I mean, you dealt with it a lot on the sermon. If you want, obviously go back, listen to that on YouTube, and listen to that sermon if you want to. But there's this difficult concept inside of this part of Scripture where God gives a directive for basically an annihilation of the people that are there in this land, and war, violence, killing is kind of ordained by God to some extent. If you could just kind of give us just the 5-minute or less view of what you were saying, because I mean, a lot of Christians get held up on this, and a lot of people are, and you talked about that. There's the God of the Old Testament, the God of the New Testament. That the God of the New Testament is seen as love. The God of the Old Testament is seen as violent or aggressive in that way. How do we rationalize that as Christians?
Yeah, so I spent quite a bit of time unpacking this in my sermon Sunday, but basically, when we talk about rationale, I think we need to start where the Bible starts. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people have kind of made up their own story as to what God must be like based on the story of Joshua, rather than seeing what happens prior to Joshua and what God says about the inhabitants of Canaan, the land of Canaan that Israel overtook and became the land of Israel, what those inhabitants were like. And so now this does not justify, obviously, us taking matters into our own hands and wiping out people who we see as evil. That doesn't justify this. But in this particular moment in history, for this unique mission, God gave this directive. I think it's a little bit of a misnomer to say that, that God commanded the annihilation of all of these people, because there's several words that are used throughout Joshua kind of interchangeably, and sometimes even in the same sentence: to utterly destroy, to drive out, and then to not adopt or copy the traditions and the lifestyles of the inhabitants of the land. Well, there's a number of issues here with this, as you see. How do you drive out people you already annihilated? They're annihilated. They can't be driven out. So it's not a total annihilation, first of all. Secondly,
meaning there's still hope. There's hope that they're going to have a life someplace else.
well, so the people could leave.
Yeah.
They can leave, and they would not be annihilated in that case. And many people did. We have record of that through the book of Joshua, that some of them were driven out, and they left the land and found somewhere else to live. So there is that, and it's kind of like the Israelites with Pharaoh. Did Pharaoh have a choice whether or not he was going to experience God's judgment? Yes or no?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he did.
He was given an opportunity.
He was given 10 different opportunities to submit to God and say, okay, I'll let the people go. And I think the same thing is here present in Joshua, even though it's not dwelt on. People had a choice. These cities had a choice whether they were going to rise up against God's plan or whether they were going to submit to it and leave. And so the people that chose not to flee were destroyed, but not utterly annihilated. We know that for a fact, though some cities were. Many cities were not completely annihilated, because we have throughout the book of Joshua these phrases like, don't adopt the ways of the Canaanite inhabitants. Well, how can you adopt the ways of somebody that's annihilated? Mm-hmm. So don't intermarry with them. How do you marry somebody that's annihilated? So this is not a total annihilation, first of all. So I know that's not necessarily a 5-minute version, but so God basically gives the biblical rationale for this is the wickedness of the inhabitants, and this is well documented in the books of Deuteronomy, and I quoted also the book of Genesis as well, when God makes this promise to Abraham in Genesis 15, and He says, "I'm not going to let you take over the land yet, because the sin of the Amorites, which was one of a group within the Canaanite people, has not reached its full measure." So God was kind of patiently waiting for the wickedness of the people of the land to reach a certain threshold where God's judgment would eventually fall on them. And so this is God's judgment, not necessarily Israel's war. Mm. This is not the Israelites versus the Canaanites, and it's certainly not words like genocide have been applied to this,
right?
Which is not only not true, it's unhelpful. It creates a knee-jerk reaction for people. When they hear that word, they think of modern genocides that they've seen or witnessed in their lifetime, or they've read about in history books, and they go, well, clearly God is not a God of justice or a God of love if he's authorizing this. But those are they're misrepresentations of what's taking place here. And so basically there's a wickedness of the people in the land on two specific fronts. One, their sexual deviancy, and number two, the issue of child sacrifice are two specific sins that God specifically warns His people in the law and gives them a whole laundry list of things not to do. Well, those didn't just appear out of thin air. God didn't just sit down and think, well, what are all the ridiculously weird sexual things that you can do? That's not what's happening in the book of Leviticus chapter 18. The laundry list is specifically related to what the inhabitants of the land were doing. Mm. And Israel...
Well, isn't that how all laws end up happening, or rules? And somebody stupid does something, and you're like, okay, no jumping off the land to do that.
Exactly.
You're not allowed to do that anymore, kind of thing.
And so Leviticus 18 is not just a list of, here's a bunch of things I don't want you to do. It's like, here's a bunch of things that you're going to encounter. You're going to see these things in the inhabitants of the land, and I don't want you copying them. Wow. These are perversions. Don't do them. And so there's a laundry list of those. And one of the things besides the sexual deviancy is child sacrifice. Mm. And so they were offering their children. And so God was basically saying, the inhabitants think that this honors their God, like it's the ultimate honoring of your God. But to me, that is so detestable that the land is going to vomit them out. Yeah. Like even the land, it gets sick to its stomach when it witnesses the horrors and the horrific nature of some of the things that these people are doing. Mm. And so I want them gone. Wow. I want them out of this land. And those who refuse to leave are going to be destroyed.
So what you're basically saying is that God was still a God of mercy.
Yes.
And God was still
400 years of mercy.
400 years of mercy.
Think about that.
Yeah.
I mean, how long has America been a country?
Yeah.
That's a long time.
Yeah. And so God was still a God of mercy. God
Yes.
didn't annihilate. There wasn't a genocide in the sense that people a lot of times view this as a genocide of the people who were in Canaan at the time. Rather, this was God purifying what he said was the land that he was going to have. And so that means driving out. That means getting rid of. That means not being a part of the sin and acts that were taking place, and giving them a direction. Like, just like you said, a law only comes because somebody has done that thing, right? And the rule is set in that place. And so God gives that direction. He gives the people the land. He says, this is what I'm calling you to. And it's not that God is a God that is different than the Old Testament than he is in the New Testament. No. And again, one of the things that I think Christians a lot of times are people that are new to faith. They read these things and they think, wow, I don't know how I can believe in a God that would do that, And Isaac, for you today, what do you say to people that say, like, I can't believe in a God that would do that to those people of Canaan? What would you say to those people?
I'd start with pretty much exactly what Ben said yesterday. I think you did an absolutely great job, and it's a really difficult question to bring up, especially when you have a limited amount of time to do it.
Sure.
But you did a really good job with that, and I do think the best place to start is with the scriptures and just explaining to them some reasons why God did this to the best we understand it. And I think, Ben, one of the other things you said that I would also say to someone like that is that God He doesn't show partiality even to his own people when they begin to disobey his commands and begin to defile the land. He says the very same thing and actually does the very same thing to the Israelites when he sends them out to exile. And so God uses at times military forces to drive people out of the land who no longer has a right to the land. And what's clear throughout the Old Testament, we've mentioned this before, is that land is always a privilege. It's never a right. And so even for the very people whom God saves and calls out of the Ur of the Chaldees, the Jewish people, he is not above punishing their sins and their injustices because of their abuses in the land. So land is not necessarily one particular person's. It's God wants to give it to them, but it's given on the condition that they obey God.
Yeah.
Insofar as they do that, they get to keep the land, and God will use other people to drive them out as necessary. So this is not even necessarily an issue of like race, of like ethnic cleansing or something like that, because you see, as you mentioned, Rahab, the prostitute, and other Canaanites were actually brought into the people of God and became ancestors of Jesus Christ. That's pretty amazing. Rahab is one of the great grandmothers. And so the issue isn't race, it's who's penitent. And that's what you said yesterday. It's who has a heart for God and who's willing to obey. And that applies to anyone on the planet who's willing to see their injustice, repent from it, and turn to God.
Yeah. Well, and even you look at Rahab, the one that was saved out of Jericho, she was no shining example in terms of her own sexual ethics. She's a prostitute.
Yeah,
I mean, she's
doing that laundry list.
She's
of
literally
things.
doing some of the laundry list of things God says, I don't want you to copy.
Yeah.
Yet she's welcomed into the people of God, and even
mentioned in the name of Jesus.
Jewish tradition says she marries Caleb, who was Joshua's co-spy. Yeah, fellow spy when they first entered the land. So she marries a very upright, good Jewish Orthodox man who was clearly sold out to the Lord. So, here's this woman who's
Caleb.
doing a lot of these.
What a gangster Caleb is. That's unbelievable.
We don't have proof of that, but that's the Jewish tradition. So, I mean, you see this where it's not just like, I want to squash everyone that's sinful. There's always an opportunity for mercy. And these people have had 400 years of opportunity for mercy, and they have continued and persisted and even continued in a downward spiral in terms of their actions, because God says the sin of the Amorites has not reached its full measure. In other words, there's a crescendo of wickedness, and they haven't hit it yet, and they're going to hit it. So in other words, they're not getting better, they're getting worse.
Wow.
And so there's this crazy downward spiral. So
one of the reasons we think this is so strange, we have such a problem with Joshua as a whole is because we as a culture have begun to believe in the relativism that we've been taught in our universities, etc., that we don't have a right to condemn anyone because there is no objective right and wrong. Meaning, if there is no God up here which tells us right and wrong is what is right and wrong, determined by each and every one of us as individuals. And I think this passage reminds us that we have a responsibility to condemn evil, to call it out as such. And truth and grace, we got to have both. But we now live in a nation that is so blind to evil that we're willing to try to appease Iran, for example. We're trying to put under the rug great atrocities and try to win people over. And the reality is we have failed to be able to condemn evil in our world. And when we're blind to that, the atrocities begin to accumulate. And I think that we've just lost that ability to condemn evil. And when you lose the ability to condemn evil, you also lose the ability to praise the good. And those two things go hand in hand.
Yeah. And I think that's where we need to land for us today, is that, our responsibility is to not take this scripture and be like, it is now our job to kill everyone who's evil, right? That's not that, but rather our job is to call out evil, to explain that evil exists in the world, and show that God is a God of mercy, and to say this evil can be redeemed. Like there can be redemption. The story of Rahab, there is redemption that happens there, and so we need to be people who are not sitting in the pews, looking at the evil of the world and being like, just annihilate it. Just blow it off the face of the earth. Because I think that is the temptation. The temptation is to see the evil of the world and to say, well, God, just send your lightning bolt and just put an end to all evil that is there. And yes, that'd be great. And we would hope that the Lord would do that, right? But in this case, we need to see that God is a God of mercy, and that 400 years of mercy, and they didn't reach the crescendo of evil. They were not at, and so today, maybe America hasn't reached the crescendo of evil, right? And we still have the ability to have a God who loves and is merciful for our people that are around us today. And even in the evil and the atrocities and the wickedness of our world, God can still reach out and touch and heal those areas. It's not our job. Like you said, we can't take this isolated directive from God and be like,
right,
this is the directive for all Christians at all times.
It's not a license to go, to be violent by any means. But I think that both of you are on the right track when it comes to it's okay to speak out against the wickedness around us, but to call down fire from heaven is something that Jesus did not support when the disciples wanted to do that.
Yeah, they wanted to. They said, "Jesus, do this."
Yeah. So we're not calling down fire from heaven on other people. And I think part of this is it's very easy to look at other people's sin and to forget what we've been forgiven of.
Exactly.
And we want them to be judged for their sin, but we're really glad that God had mercy on us. And so it's like, you can't really have it both ways. You either want God to be merciful or you don't.
Yeah.
And I think we do want God to be merciful both to us and to the people around us. And I think it's important to emphasize that.
I think that's one of the big problems in our society today is there is this idea of putting out a statement, right? And showing somebody else's sin or brokenness and not being willing to, I guess, to realize the mercy that we have. This is huge on like Instagram right now, right? People will post something controversial in their story, right? And then they're like, no one will ever respond to this because they can't. There's no dialogue, right? And that it's this idea that like my moral superiority is better than yours, and so therefore I'm going to say what I'm going to say, and you're just going to have to live with it and deal with it. And it's like, well, we're all broken. We've all been saved by grace. That mercy is applicable to everyone. And that's applicable to the person you're talking about, and you're applicable to yourself as well. And I said I get so frustrated by that because I see friends that I went to college with or people that I'm in high school with, and they just post these things, and you're like you're not trying to do a dialogue. All you're trying to do is trying to promote.
Shut down conversation.
Yeah, shut down conversation. Promote yourself and say, hey, this is the exact moral superiority that you should have. And what you're saying with this whole story of Joshua is that we see that God is a God that still is in control, and that he's merciful even when we would be the ones who are saying, calling fire down from heaven, and I guess that challenges me today. That challenges me today to not be looking at the evil of the world and saying, all right, God, when's that lightning bolt coming? But rather seeing it with an aspect of the eyes of Jesus.
I think there is something else that is important to name here, and that is when you see the command of Joshua to take out the people, to drive them out. This is a command, as you said, that's bound by time, bound for a particular season in a particular place for a particular people. You contrast that, I'm looking at my Bible right now at the list of scriptures that I have from the Quran that have commands to annihilate the infidels wherever you find them. And there's probably 10 or so here within the Quran that say, without a limit of where, without a limit of time, this is as far as a lot of Muslim scholars will say, there is no bound for when this command expires. And
it's forever.
It's forever. And that's part of the problem with what we're seeing right now, that in a sense, according to Hamas, Israel cannot exist. They have to be fully annihilated for them to be satisfied, basically, which is why a two-state solution has never been able to work. And part of that is because in their founding documents, these sort of things weren't bound by time. And I think that's a very important distinction to make. And that's why, as we've said, we have no right to do this. And that's why we have a level of repentance required where we have done this, because it's not something that Yahweh accepts of, even as much as Allah might. So.
Wow. Well, but unfortunately, Christianity has, during the Crusades, obviously, has copied Islam in some respects. And I'm not blaming Islam for Christianity's poor theology, but we have among our own ranks over our history of Christianity, we have failed to see that this is not a carte blanche. Cross the board, you can take out people who are sexually deviant, or you can take out people who, are
child sacrificers,
or that are living in the promised land. I mean, that right to the land may not be a blanket forever. You guys are going to live here, and so.
And one of the things I just say to that when I hear that is we fail to do that, but it goes against the founder of our faith, Jesus, and it goes against our founding documents. When jihad happens, they do not have the ability to say this goes against our founding documents or it goes against our founder. Muhammad was a fanatic when it came to empire building. Yeah. And so we get it wrong, but we get it wrong contrary to our scriptures. They do it right in alignment with their scriptures. And maybe that's controversial, but that's how I read it.
Thank you, Isaac.
Thank you, Isaac, for bringing in the controversy today. Well, how do we leave this idea of where we're seeing in our world today, we're seeing evil, and we're seeing people who continue to perpetrate evil. What are we as Christians supposed to be doing? What is like we can talk about the fact that we live inside of God's presence and that He is for us and He's not against us. How do we leave this conversation where those who are listening are saying, man, what do I do next?
I think Ben said it well when he summed up this argument on Sunday, is that we have to acknowledge that the land is not ours. This land that we have, the land that we love, America, we have been given it as a privilege by God. And if we continue to walk in obedience to the Lord as a nation, then that promise would continue to be ours. But if we walk away from God, then we can very well, the lands will vomit us out. I think that command that God says over and over in the Old Testament, the land will vomit you out, we are not exempt from. And so the very first thing we should do as a people is to examine our own lives as to where we're failing to obey God and to align ourselves with His will for what a life looks like in following Jesus. And before we point fingers anywhere else, we need to first look inwards as a nation, as individuals.
Yeah. Well, next week we have Bob Shaw. He's going to be preaching for us on the water cycle and the cycle of sin. I got it.
Water cycle, word cycle.
Water cycle, word cycle.
Wow. We're going to be learning meteorology.
Meteorology is going to be, it's going to be awesome.
I've always wanted to be a meteorologist when I was a kid, man. So this is going to be
Have you ever gone and done it? Like done the green screen thing? I did it at the
have you?
thing. Yeah, where you stand on the green screen, you can point towards the little cloud and everything and stuff.
No, I'm thinking about taking his class at COCC, though.
There we go. Future.
That.
You have a future in
right.
meteorology.
On the side, yeah.
So that's gonna be this next Sunday. We want to thank again, a big shout out to our volunteers, and just we don't really necessarily have a member of the week this week, but just saying thank you to everyone who volunteer and help out and do the things that are above and beyond than just our normal Sunday mornings, but also even in the Sunday morning stuff, just thinking of people like Nita who makes the cookies and Dan who plunges the toilets. We're thankful for all of you. This episode is brought to you by the people at Ponderosa Pizza. Their men's breakfast was this Saturday. My daughter had a volleyball game, so I was not able to make it, but they heard the word over there. They spent some time in prayer. They had some good breakfast pizza. So if you guys want to head over there, that'd be a great opportunity for you to get connected to other men inside the community. And we thank you so much for listening. We know this one was a long one, but the Lord is with us, and we're excited about that. You can watch us on YouTube too as well this week, because I'm going to try to post this thing up. So have a great rest of your week. Hopefully God bless you. You are listening to the Bread Truck Monday podcast, a production of High Lakes Christian Church. Feel free to download all the episodes on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or stream us on Spotify. Thanks, and God bless.